For centuries, the story of the African diaspora has been told, retold, and too often rewritten by voices that did not live its truth. It has been framed through the lens of those who sought to define it, not by those who bore its weight, carried its legacy, and built its future. But today, we are no longer bound to accept a history written for us. We are called to reclaim the one that lives within us. The rewritten history of the African diaspora is not just about correcting the past, it is about awakening the power, pride, and purpose of an entire people who were never meant to be forgotten. The world has tried to tell us that Africa was darkness before the arrival of the light. They said civilization began somewhere else, that greatness was born in distant lands. But the truth, the undeniable truth, is that long before the world spoke of Greece or Rome, the soil of Africa had already birthed empires that taught the world how to build, trade, govern, and heal. It was Africa that raised scholars from the libraries of Timbuktu. It was Africa that engineered the pyramids with precision that even today's technology can barely comprehend. It was Africa that cultivated mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and philosophy long before they had names in foreign tongues. The rewritten history of the African diaspora is not a new story, it is the original one finally told without distortion. When the chains of slavery tore millions from their homes, it was not just bodies that were taken, it was stories, traditions, languages, and legacies. But what the oppressors did not understand is that while you can enslave the body, you can never imprison the soul of a people. The African spirit did not die in the slave ships or in the cotton fields. It survived in the rhythm of drums and the whispers of faith, in the strength of resilience. It found new roots in the Americas, the Caribbean, and across the world. That spirit reinvented itself through struggle, through pain, through resistance, and it rose again and again to remind humanity that no chain can bind destiny. The rewritten history of the African diaspora is not about revenge or anger. It is about restoration. It is about giving credit where credit was stolen and dignity where it was denied. For too long, the narrative of African people has been confined to slavery, poverty, and pain. But that is not the full story. It is merely a chapter. The real story is one of survival, reinvention, and excellence that has shaped every corner of this planet. From the inventions of Black scientists who changed modern life, to the rhythms of African music that pulse in every genre around the world, to the courage of civil rights leaders who reshaped democracy, our influence is woven into the very fabric of humanity. We must teach the next generation not to start their story in chains, but in crowns. We must remind them that they are descendants of kings and queens, builders and dreamers, thinkers and warriors. Their ancestry is not a scar, it is a source of power. The rewritten history of the African diaspora calls us to look deeper into the mirror of our identity and see not what the world told us to be, but what we truly are. It is time to remove the labels of inferiority that were never ours to wear. When people tell you that Africa is poor, remember this: Africa is not poor. It has been plundered. Its resources have built empires elsewhere while its people were taught to doubt their worth. The diamonds, the gold, the oil, the culture, the wisdom, all were taken, commercialized, and resold. But the greatest wealth of Africa was never its minerals. It was always its people. The African diaspora is living proof of that wealth. Across continents, Africans and their descendants have risen to the highest offices, mastered every discipline, and influenced every field imaginable. That is not by chance. That is destiny reclaiming its course. And yet this rewriting is not just about facts and figures. It is a call to consciousness. It is about shifting how we see ourselves and how we see one another. The rewritten history of the African diaspora teaches that unity is not optional, it is essential, because division was the weapon used to weaken us. The colonizers knew that if they could separate tribe from tribe, nation from nation, brother from brother, they could control the story. But when we stand together, when the African on the continent, the African in the Caribbean, and the African in the Americas recognize they share one root, then the world will witness the rebirth of power, unlike any other. This is the time to stop asking for permission to be great. The rewritten history of the African diaspora reminds us that we already are. The world's future depends on the awakening of Africa and her descendants, because within us lies the memory of balance, the understanding of humanity's harmony with nature, community, and spirit. We once led the world in science and wisdom, and we can do it again, not by imitating others but by embracing the genius that already flows through our veins. We are not rewriting history to erase others, we are rewriting it to restore truth. The story of the African diaspora is not a tragedy, it is a triumph. It is the saga of a people who faced the harshest storms and still sang. A people who built nations with hands once bound. A people who turned pain into art, oppression into movement, and sorrow into song. Every step we take today echoes the footsteps of ancestors who refused to give up. And their resilience is not just history, it is inheritance. If you listen closely, you can still hear their voices. They speak through the wind that moves across the Atlantic, whispering, "Remember who you are." They speak through the rhythm of the drum, through the poetry of our speech, through the brilliance of our minds. The rewritten history of the African diaspora is not written in ink. It's written in blood, sweat, and soul. It's written in every act of defiance, every dream fulfilled, and every child who refuses to forget. We are the children of those who survived the impossible, the descendants of those who dreamed when dreaming was dangerous, the inheritors of a legacy that cannot be erased. Let that truth settle in your heart. You are living proof of the victory they prayed for. You are the continuation of a story that began before maps, before borders, before history books tried to define. The rewritten history begins now with us, because the power to tell it no longer lies in the hands of those who distorted it. It belongs to the voices that lived it, the hearts that felt it, and the minds that are ready to reclaim it. So rise with pride, speak with power. Learn your past not as pain, but as purpose. Understand that you are not just the product of what was done to you, you are the product of what you have overcome. The rewritten history of the African diaspora is not just about where we come from, it's about where we're going. It's about turning memory into movement and identity into influence. And when the world looks again at Africa and her children, they will no longer see victims or statistics. They will see the architects of civilization, the thinkers of tomorrow, the heartbeat of humanity. Because history is no longer theirs to define, it is ours to declare. The rewritten history of the African diaspora is not just a retelling, it is a rebirth. It's a reminder that no matter how many times our story was silenced, rewritten, or erased, truth has a way of rising. Just like the sun over the motherland, it always finds its way back to shine again. The world will one day realize that Africa was never behind. It was always ahead, waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. And now the time has come. The rewritten history begins with you. Every dream you chase, every boundary you break, every truth you tell, it adds another line to the legacy of a people who refuse to be forgotten. The African diaspora is not scattered, it is connected. And the more we awaken to that truth, the more unstoppable we become. So remember this, we are not rewriting history to change the past, we are rewriting it to change the future. And when that future is written, let it say that this was the generation that refused to be silent, that this was the time when the sons and daughters of Africa rose again, not as victims but as victors. Let it say that this was the moment we took back our story and in doing so reclaimed our destiny. Because the rewritten history of the African diaspora is not just about us, it's about humanity remembering its origin, its strength, and its soul. And once the truth is told, nothing can ever silence it again. The rewritten history of the African diaspora begins with reclaiming the truth that was stolen, a truth buried beneath centuries of distortion, erasure, and manipulation. For far too long, the story of Africa and her descendants has been told by those who neither understood nor respected its essence. It was rewritten to serve the conqueror, not the conquered, to glorify the taker, not the creator. But now a new voice is rising, one that carries the echoes of the ancestors, the rhythm of resistance, and the determination to restore what was taken. Reclaiming identity and truth is not simply about rewriting books. It is about rewriting consciousness. It is about replacing shame with pride, doubt with knowledge, and silence with the sound of our own story. The truth is that Africa was never a land waiting to be discovered. It was a land already enlightened. Its people built civilizations that stood as beacons of innovation, spirituality, and intellect, when much of the world was still searching for light. From the Nile Valley to Great Zimbabwe, from Timbuktu to Benin, Africa was a living testament to human greatness. Scholars studied astronomy, medicine, architecture, and philosophy long before foreign invaders arrived with their own interpretations of progress. Yet history books told another tale, a tale that portrayed Africa as primitive, chaotic, and in need of rescue. That narrative was not an accident. It was a deliberate act of theft. By stealing Africa's glory, colonial powers justified its exploitation. They enslaved its people and rewrote its past, ensuring that generations would grow up believing a lie. But the truth cannot be buried forever. It has a way of resurfacing, like a seed beneath the soil waiting for rain. The rewritten history of the African diaspora is that rain. It nourishes forgotten roots and allows truth to bloom again. Reclaiming identity begins with remembering who we were before we were told who we should be. Remembering that before the slave ships, we were scientists, artists, builders, and philosophers. Remembering that before borders divided us, we were one people connected by spirit and heritage. When we reclaim that memory, we no longer walk in the shadow of what was done to us. We walk in the light of what we have always been. The rewriting of this history is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of restoration. It restores balance to a world that has long leaned on false. It restores dignity to those whose worth was deliberately hidden. And it restores the rightful narrative that humanity itself was born on African soil. For too long we have been taught to measure ourselves by standards that were never made for us, to believe that progress, intelligence, and civility began elsewhere. But the truth is that the earliest advancements in mathematics, writing, and governance were born in African civilization. It is time to teach our children that their history does not begin with chains. It begins with crowns. Reclaiming truth also means confronting the lies that still linger. It means understanding how media, education, and politics continue to shape perception. It means questioning why the word African has so often been associated with struggle rather than strength. It means looking at how centuries of misrepresentation have shaped how people of African descent view themselves and how the world views them. The rewritten history seeks to heal this wound, not by seeking approval from others, but by rediscovering the pride within. Because true liberation begins in the mind. When a people know their worth, no force can convince them they are powerless. The journey of the African diaspora is not defined solely by suffering. It is defined by survival and brilliance in the face of unimaginable odds. When our ancestors were taken from their lands, stripped of their names and languages, something remarkable happened. They created new forms of art, new rhythms of music, new languages of resilience. They carried the spirit of their homeland within them, even when the world tried to extinguish it. That is the unbreakable essence of the African identity. It cannot be destroyed, only transformed. The rewritten history acknowledges that power. It honors those who endured and those who rose from the ashes to build new worlds. To reclaim identity is to reclaim purpose. It means understanding that every generation has a responsibility to preserve truth for the next. Our ancestors fought with courage and endurance so that we could stand here today with freedom of thought and voice. Now it is our turn to fight, not with weapons, but with wisdom. We fight by telling our stories, by teaching our children the truth of their roots, by supporting one another across continents and cultures. The rewritten history of the African diaspora is not confined to books or classrooms. It is lived every day through pride, unity, and achievement. Every time an African child learns that their heritage is noble, every time a young person of African descent refuses to be limited by stereotypes, every time we celebrate Black excellence in art, science, or leadership, we are rewriting history in real time. The reclaiming of identity is not a one-time event. It is a continuous act of awakening. It requires patience, courage, and persistence. Because for every lie told about who we are, there is a truth waiting to rise. Let the world know that the African story does not need validation. It needs recognition. Let it be known that we are not seeking revenge but remembrance. Let it be known that our goal is not to erase anyone else's contribution, but to ensure that ours is no longer ignored. The rewritten history of the African diaspora is the bridge between past and future. It connects the memory of our ancestors to the vision of our descendants. It tells the world that our story did not end in oppression, it continues in empowerment. And so to reclaim identity and truth is to stand tall and speak loudly in the language of authenticity. It is to say we know who we are, where we come from, and where we are going. It is to look at history not as a burden, but as a foundation. It is to rise above manipulation and reclaim authorship of our narrative, because the power to define ourselves is the power to shape our destiny. And once a people reclaim that power, no one can ever take it away again. This is the essence of the rewritten history of the African diaspora. It is the awakening of a sleeping giant, the restoration of a silenced truth, and the declaration that Africa and her children were never lost, only waiting to be found by their own life. Division was once the weapon used to weaken the African spirit, but unity is the shield that will now protect and empower it. For centuries, outsiders understood the potential that lay in African unity, and so they crafted systems and strategies to divide. They built invisible walls between tribes, regions, and religions, turning neighbors into rivals and brothers into strangers. They separated us by geography, language, and ideology until we began to see each other through the lens of difference rather than connection. This was not accidental. It was intentional. Because when a people stand together with one purpose, they are unbreakable. But when they are scattered, confused, and disconnected, they become easy to control. The rewritten history of the African diaspora reminds us that unity is not just a dream, it is a necessity for survival and progress. Across the globe, the African bloodline runs through millions of lives. On the continent, in the Americas, in Europe, in the Caribbean, and beyond, our stories may differ, but our roots are the same. The rhythms of our music, the tones of our voices, the warmth of our spirit, they all whisper the same truth. We are one family. Yet, somewhere along the journey, we forgot this truth. Colonial powers used race, class, and religion to divide the African people both at home and abroad. They convinced us that one shade of skin was superior to another, that one accent, one nation, one tribe was more valuable than the rest. This psychological warfare planted seeds of distrust that still grow today, but the time has come to uproot those lies. We must see ourselves not as scattered pieces of a broken mirror, but as reflections of one powerful light. The African diaspora is vast and diverse, but within that diversity lies a single heartbeat, a rhythm that connects every descendant of the motherland. Whether we speak Swahili, English, French, or Creole, whether we live in Lagos, Kingston, Chicago, or London, the essence that flows within us is the same. It is the essence of resilience, creativity, and divine strength. The rewritten story of our people begins when we recognize that unity does not mean uniformity. It does not mean that we all think the same or look the same. It means we move with one vision to uplift, to restore, and to rebuild. Our unity is not about sameness, it is about shared purpose. When we look back at history, we see how division weakened our collective power. During the colonial period, African leaders were pitted against one another, each manipulated to fight battles that benefited those who sought to exploit them. The borders drawn by iron hands carved the continent into fragments, creating nations that often ignored cultural continuity. And when millions were taken away through the transatlantic slave trade, the connection between the motherland and her children was deliberately severed. Those abroad were taught to forget their roots, while those at home were taught to dismiss their lost kin. Yet, despite all that, the bond never fully broke. It lived on through stories, music, and spirit. It survived through every generation that refused to let go of its ancestral pride. Now, as the world evolves and technology connects us across oceans, we are witnessing a reawakening. Africans across the diaspora are rediscovering each other. We see African Americans tracing their roots back to Ghana and Nigeria. We see Caribbean descendants celebrating their African ancestry. We see Africans on the continent embracing their global brothers and sisters. This movement is not coincidence, it is destiny. The ancestors' voices are calling us back to one another, reminding us that we are stronger together than apart. The rewritten history of the African diaspora cannot be told without the element of unity, because our survival as a people has always depended on it. When we unite, we rewrite the narrative. Unity changes how we are seen and how we see ourselves. It transforms us from scattered groups into a global force. It allows us to control our image, our economies, our politics, and our destiny. Imagine what could happen if every African descendant supported one another's businesses, shared resources, and celebrated each other's victories instead of competing for recognition from those who once enslaved us. Imagine if the African continent and its diaspora worked hand in hand to build industries, educate the youth, and tell our own stories. The potential is beyond measure. Our unity is not only cultural, it is economic, intellectual, and spiritual. It is the foundation upon which the future will be built. For unity to thrive, we must first heal from the wounds of mistrust. We must unlearn the false narratives that were planted to keep us apart. The stereotypes that portray Africans as poor, African Americans as angry, Caribbeans as isolated. These are all tools of division. They are lies meant to distract us from our shared greatness. The truth is that we have more in common than we were ever taught to believe. We share the same struggle for dignity, the same desire for freedom, and the same vision for progress. When we recognize that, our differences become strengths rather than barriers. True unity begins with understanding that every member of the African diaspora is a piece of the same divine puzzle. The African in Senegal and the African in Brazil share the same ancestral memory. The African in Jamaica and the African in Ethiopia share the same rhythm of resilience. The African in America and the African in South Africa share the same fire for justice. When we begin to see each other not as separate groups but as extensions of one powerful lineage, we reclaim what was lost. We restore the bridge that was burned. The rewritten history of the African diaspora demands that we rise together, not as isolated communities, but as a global family connected by purpose. When one of us succeeds, it uplifts us all. When one of us suffers, it affects us all. This understanding transforms unity from a word into a movement. We must support African art, African business, African education, and African innovation wherever it thrives, because every achievement made by one of us is a victory for all of us. The time has come for the world to see that the African diaspora is not fragmented. It is unified in spirit, ambition, and destiny. The color of our skin, the texture of our hair, the rhythm of our speech, all these are reminders of an origin too powerful to be erased. The rewritten story is not about reclaiming the past alone. It is about shaping a future where no African child feels lesser, no African nation stands divided, and no African descendant forgets their worth. When we stand together, the world listens different. When we build together, the world changes permanently. The rewritten history of the African diaspora is not complete until unity becomes our reality. It is the key to our liberation, our growth, and our power. It is the promise that our ancestors whispered through generations, that one day their children would remember who they are, and once they did, nothing could stop them. That time is now. We are one people, one lineage, one unstoppable force. And the rewritten story of the African diaspora begins and ends with unity that cannot be broken. The rewritten history of the African diaspora is not just about looking back at what was taken. It is about using that memory to build power for the generations ahead. Memory is not meant to chain us to the past. It is meant to remind us of what we survived, what we learned, and what we must now do. The African story is not a tale of defeat. It is the story of a people who transformed pain into strength and turned survival into art. Every scar, every struggle, every loss holds the blueprint for transformation. The rewritten history does not exist to reopen wounds. It exists to turn those wounds into wisdom. It teaches us that every moment of suffering can become a source of power when it is understood, remembered, and used as fuel for progress. For centuries, our ancestors carried burdens that would have broken most. They endured the unthinkable: chains, displacement, humiliation, and systemic oppression. Yet from that darkness, they created light. They built communities out of nothing. They raised generations who could dream again, and they taught the world what resilience truly means. The rewritten history of the African diaspora is a reminder that every act of survival was an act of rebellion, and every act of rebellion was an act of creation. They were never victims, they were architects of hope, even when the world denied them everything. Their courage did not end with their generation, it flows through ours. The blood that survived the Middle Passage is the same blood that built nations, led movements, and now demands recognition. That is the unbroken thread of power that connects the past to the present. Turning memory into power begins when we stop allowing history to be something that only defines us and start using it to refine us. It means taking what was meant to destroy and transforming it into a source of pride. The memory of slavery, of colonization, of struggle is not there to trap us. It is there to remind us how much we can endure and still rise. We have the responsibility to transform that memory into progress, into ownership, into vision. The Rewritten History calls us to look at our ancestors, not with pity but with gratitude, because they laid the foundation for every opportunity we now have. Their silence became our voice. Their pain became our platform. Their endurance became our inheritance. The African diaspora must realize that the greatest power we hold is not in what was taken, but in what could never be taken. Our creativity, our spirit, our culture, and our unbreakable connection to purpose. Even when stripped of everything, our people created new languages, new music, and new identities. From spirituals that carried messages of freedom to the rhythms that birthed jazz, reggae, and hip-hop, we turned oppression into expression. Every beat, every lyric, every invention born from struggle was a declaration that we were still here. That is what it means to turn memory into power, to take the fragments of a broken story and build a masterpiece the world cannot ignore. But to truly transform memory into power, we must also learn. We must study our past, not as pain, but as preparation. We must understand the systems that were designed to suppress us, so that we never fall into their traps again. We must educate ourselves about our history, not only through the lens of suffering, but through the lens of contribution. Africans have always contributed to humanity, through science, architecture, art, and philosophy. Our ancestors were innovators long before the modern world claimed discovery. When we reclaim that truth, we reclaim our ability to dream without limits. Knowledge of self is the fuel of transformation, and every generation that learns the truth writes a new chapter of strength and self-worth. Turning memory into power also means taking control of our narrative in every space. For too long, others have told our story through their own lens, painting Africa as desperate, broken, or dependent. But we know the truth. Africa is rich, vibrant, and powerful. The diaspora is global, talented, and visionary. To rewrite history, we must tell it ourselves in books, films, schools, and art. We must build institutions that preserve our memory correctly. We must fund our own media, teach our own children, and celebrate our own heroes. Because whoever controls the story controls the future, and our future cannot be shaped by voices that once silenced us. The rewritten history of the African diaspora teaches that progress without memory is fragile. It reminds us that forgetting our past makes us vulnerable to repeating it. But when we remember with purpose, when we understand the depth of our journey, we become unstoppable. The pain of the past becomes the strength of the present. The memory of injustice becomes the reason we fight for fairness. The story of slavery becomes the foundation of freedom. We are the living continuation of everything our ancestors dreamed of. Each step we take forward is a victory they once prayed for. Every generation has a duty to carry the flame higher than the last. Our grandparents fought for dignity, our parents fought for opportunity, and now we must fight for unity and progress. The rewritten history is not just a mirror, it is a map. It shows us where we came from and points us toward where we are meant to go. It tells us that we cannot allow the legacy of our people to be defined by pain alone. We must write our story through success, excellence, and self-mastery. The memory of the African diaspora is vast and sacred. It contains the lessons of survival, the wisdom of resilience, and the vision of greatness. It is up to us to transform that memory into momentum. Turning memory into power means recognizing that we carry the hopes of those who came before us. Every dream we pursue is part of their redemption. Every success we achieve is proof that their sacrifices were not in vain. When an African child excels in science, when a descendant of the diaspora leads a nation, when a community thrives despite adversity, that is history rewritten. That is power rediscovered. That is memory transformed into motion. We are no longer bound by the past, we are guided by it. The rewritten history of the African diaspora is not a book to be read, it is a story still being written, and we are the authors. The ink is in our actions, the pages are our choices, and the message is clear: we are not defined by what was done to us, but by what we do now. Our ancestors handed us not just a legacy of pain, but a legacy of possibility. The rewritten story reminds us that our power was never lost. It was simply waiting for us to remember who we are. And when we finally understand that memory is not weakness but wisdom, that history is not a burden but a guide, then we begin to see the beauty in our struggle. We begin to realize that every generation of the African diaspora has the power to transform reality, just as those before transformed pain into perseverance. The rewritten history teaches that our story was never buried. It was alive all along, waiting for us to speak it into existence. And now, as we rise to claim it, we fulfill the dream of those who came before us, to turn memory into strength and strength into destiny.